Thanks for coming tonight. So I have the pleasure of introducing Walter McClennen, and Walter is a retired educator who lives in Holliston, my hometown, and has written several books presenting comprehensive collections of saved family letters. He presents to local libraries and schools and historical societies his experiences compiling large numbers of important personal letters into published books, two of which he has with him tonight. Hannah Smith, The Medfield Girl here, and Remembering Clem, A Good American in Iran. So we'll get the pleasure of hearing more about those tonight. So I also have the distinct pleasure of knowing Walter personally. His wife was my 5th grade teacher, so I know, and my most memorable teacher. So
hopefully positively,
in the most incredibly positive way. So I feel really blessed to have connection with this family. So thank you for joining us tonight and sharing all of your wisdom. So without further ado.
Thanks a lot, Liz. Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I was actually doing some work on, we live on Fisk Street in Holliston. I was doing some work on the Fisk family history, which is very rich in Holliston. And I came over to the Sherborn Library to get a document because the Holliston Library was in disarray because of a leaky roof. Now, we won't go into the Sherborn Library, but the Sherborn Library was here in the community center, and I was probing for the information, and Liz heard me talking about it and heard my name or something, and she came out and mentioned that am I connected to or related to her 5th grade teacher, and so we connected at that point. And the Sherborn Library has helped me with my Fisk studies also, as well as George Fisk, who's here this evening, who helped me with a lot of information about the Fisk family. So it's neat to be talking here in Sherborn. We'll try to keep this informal, but it's going to be structured. I'll be talking too fast because I've got a lot I want to do. But I'm going to first talk not about Hannah Smith, which is most of the stuff you see here. That was my book published in 2002, my first effort with family letters. But I'm going to start with talking about Remembering Clem, A Good American in Iran. And he was there from 1948 to 1978. And the title is long. It goes on to say 30 years of Christian service, because he was someone very devoted to his Bible and his God, and he wanted to serve people. He had a very interesting life story. I'm going to give you the end of my talk right now, and then those of you who don't think you're interested can leave, because it's all in the last page of my book, Remembering Clem, which was published 2 years ago via Amazon, and you can buy it on Amazon, or your friends can buy it on Amazon. Or I have some here this evening for donations. You will get a book if you wish to make a donation to the Clem Project, which is basically just a nonprofit that I have to keep my writing going. So I'm not trying to make any money off of these. So people, if they think they want to work through these books, you can have, I have some here tonight, and you might be interested. But the reason I want to say this is because I have a goal which is about history and about individuals in history. And it's probably central to my work of the last 20 years, focusing on family letters. And so the last page of my book, Remembering Clem, takes a quote from Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist. How many of you have read The Alchemist? Anybody? Okay, some have. If I ask that question to my children's generation, they're in their 30s and 40s, everybody will raise their hand. It's very popular with the next generation down. Paulo Coelho is a Brazilian author, and he writes very well. His books have been translated in English. He wrote at the end of the book, The Alchemist, who was talking to a young boy who was on a life search, going from Spain down to Egypt. And it's a fascinating book to read. I'm sure it's in the Sherborn Library. Thank you. I end my book with this quote, and it's very central to what I believe. No matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world. And normally, he doesn't even know it. Or she, obviously. No matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't even know it. I believe that. And I believe each of us has a contribution we make, and they're pretty important contributions, and they run the range of things. That is central to this book here. I'm talking about letters and family letters, and I've been blessed through the last 20 years to get two major collections of letters related to my wife's family. She sometimes says, oh, you married me just for the letters, nothing else. But that's not true, because neither of us knew anything about these letters when we got married. It was only after we were married for 30 years that these things came into our life. So the set of letters that resulted in this book came from Carol's father's cousin, first cousins, two cousins, who were the sisters of Clement Scott Jr. This is, I guess you'd say, a Connecticut family, be the best way to describe it, Connecticut, but also Wyoming and Colorado and Boston connections. It was Clem and his two sisters. The two sisters, my wife's father's first cousin, received letters from their brother, Clem, as he worked as a Presbyterian missionary or Presbyterian mission service teacher in Iran from 1948 to 1978. Now just reflect on those dates. 1948 to 1978. So he went there, and he had a tragic event in his life earlier that I'll go into, but he went there in 1948 seeking to solve some problems of how he was going to work in the world. He had been a teacher, and he was so close to his family, he wrote to his mother and his two sisters through this 30-year period and longer. So what happened was the sisters, one of them in 2006, we were out visiting her in Denver, Colorado, and she knew that I had done this book of letters here, which is also related to the aunts. I'm going to call her an aunt, okay? The aunt's family. She knew that I knew how to work with letters because of the work I did here. These are 19th century letters, 1810 to 1825 or so. And she said, Walter, I have the letters of my brother, who was deceased. He died in 1985. I have the letters of my brother Clem, and I want to know, would you like these letters? She was about 90 years old or so, and she was trying to figure out what she would do. And she had 108 letters. I said, wow. I had met Clem twice when he came back. Once a year, he would come back from Iran, or when he was retired in Egypt for his last 5 years, he'd come back from Egypt and visit family. And we're close to the family via sort of cousin connections, and so I had met Clem twice. But I didn't know him particularly well. It was just a social meeting for briefly. But he was an icon in the family and an icon of just a loving, very good Christian soul. He was just a good person, and you just sensed that when you were with him. But also he is known as someone who knew a lot about history and politics and literature because he was a teacher. So I told Reddy, yeah, I'll take the letters because I'd like to see, what they have. So for the next 2 years, I started reading these letters and getting a sense of who Clem was. And these letters were from 1948 to 1960 or so. So I started to learn about him, and I asked Reddy and her sister Marjorie, these are Clem's two sisters in their 90s, questions about him. I started to put together a brief history about him, who he was. And got a sense of who he was, and I thought I might start to make some compendium of these letters. And after 2 years, the other sister, Marjorie, said, Walter, guess what? I found some letters that Clem wrote to my mother and me, and I know you're working on my sister Reddy's letters. Would you like these letters too? So I said, no, that's great. And she said they spanned a greater time period. It spanned from his education years. He went to Milton Academy, then he went to Harvard, then he went to the University of California at Berkeley. And then he dropped out of that international relations program and became a teacher at Hampden Hall School in Connecticut, just north of Yale. So she said, would you like his letters? And this went back into his childhood, teenage years, college years, very challenging postgraduate years where the studies didn't work out well, and then into his World War II years, which I'll get back to. She said, would you like the letters? I said, sure, I'd like those. Thank you very much. These two aunts were very, very good people and very close to my wife, Carol, and myself. Those of you who didn't know when we started, my wife, Carol, was over here. Woo-hoo, Carol, woo-hoo. And without her, I'm not here doing this talk. So she said, would you like the letters? I said, sure. So I figured I'd get another 100 letters, 120 letters. So she sent me this box of letters. There was 550 letters in the box. Now, some people might say, oh, that's great, you got a lot of letters. But if you're doing something with letters, you don't want this to happen. Somebody asked me, why did it take you 10 years to do this book? That's the reason. So she had letters that he had written in his teenage years to his parents, college years to his parents, and then continuing on to mother. And the mother was widowed just 3 months before Pearl Harbor. Clem's dad died of a heart attack coming cross country from Colorado back home. At age 60, he died of, I'll say a heart attack. It was a heart disease issue that hit hard. So the widowed mother had her two daughters. Clem was the oldest. He was the son, the oldest, and confronting World War II. Let me digress just the letters. So I had all these letters. I had, at this point, I'm up at 650 letters. So I had to figure out how am I going to tackle this? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to read them all. So that was a lot of reading to do. And I spent several years, first on the 108 letters, but then several years on having the whole compendium of them. I had to get them together and marry them and get all the dates integrated so I could make a single story. So the central aspect of Clem's life that I want you to know about is that just 4 or 5 months after his father died, he was drafted. And he was a teacher, and he had a good educational background. He could have tried to go into officer candidate school or something like that. And he just said, no, I'm drafted, I'm going to go in, I'm going to serve my country. I'm going to fight for our national cause. So he went to Camp Croft in South Carolina and trained for 5 months. And then he had a very, an impossible accident, but it happened. The soldiers Saturday night, at that time, it was, you know about hopping trains in the Depression. People would hop trains to get from point A to point B, particularly poor people, but soldiers would do it. A lot of people would do it. Well, if you were training for the military before the war and you had to get into Spartansburg, you might just hop on a train. That's what the guys would do. Let's hop on the train and go into town. So he did this, and he fell from the train, and his arm fell under the wheel of the train and was severed. So he wanted to go and serve his country. He suddenly was in a situation without his right arm, and he was right-handed. And so he wanted very much to stay in the military. He tried to stay in the military, and they finally told him, no, you won't be able to. So he went back to Connecticut, in the Hartford area, West Hartford, and got his health back through the following several years, and working with different businesses there, trying to figure out what he was going to do. He lived with a very protective mother. She had lost her husband, and now she has her son who was with this injury, life impacting. And she certainly wanted him to stay around and maybe go back to teaching. He was on a life search at this point. What should I do? He was from a religious family, Congregationalist family in Connecticut. He was, I'd say, a devout Christian who, turned to that for solace at times, or frequently. He decided to go to the theological seminary at Hartford, and which is Presbyterian oriented, and started to train to be a mission service worker the missionaries were not just doing religious work, they were doing health work and teaching. And some of the teaching was teaching for staff, but it was also teaching nationals in the countries they went to. So he trained for 2 years there and got his master's degree, and then in May, or I think it was May or early June of 1948, he shipped out on a ship from New York City and went across the ocean and through the Mediterranean Sea and to Lebanon, and then flew up to Syria and over to Iran, to Iran, where he started his service with the Presbyterian service. The interesting thing about this is, in terms of the big picture, this is exactly when the United Nations had and President Truman had recognized the State of Israel, May 14th or 15th, 1948. At that time, he was getting on a ship, and some of his first letters were talking about it's peaceful on the ship. There's a lot of arguments from time to time, but there are Arabs, Jews, French, Russians, all sorts of people, and there's lots of loud talking, lots of different languages, but people are basically peaceful together. But some of the Jews were headed over towards Israel at that time, to the new nation. He arrived, and he started writing letters home immediately. And he asked, I remember when he went into the military in January of 1942, he asked his mother, save these letters. And that was an important thing. I think she would have saved them anyway, because I think this family did this. But the family saved letters, and they saved letters and documents through the Scott family. That's my wife's maiden name. For years. They could be from aunts and uncles, grandparents, letters and documents they saved. And the other book that I'll be talking about at the end of my talk, the letters we got for Hannah Smith were in the bottom of this trunk here, which is sort of a seafaring trunk. You can take a look at it. And that trunk came to us when Carol's dad died in 1997. And at the bottom of the trunk were about 140 letters and poems and braiding account documents from Hannah Smith, Carol's great-great-great-grandmother who lived in Medfield. At any rate, so when I started to get interested in, and I'm going to be checking my watch because I'm trying to do 20-minute segment, a 20-minute segment, 20-minute segment. I told Liz there'll be a half hour. We'll have questions at the end. And also, anytime if you want to pop in with a question, go for it. But so I had all these letters, and I put together this book here. And I had to isolate which letters do I want to include. Somebody would ask me, well, could you read the letters? Did he write neatly? And his writing was not too bad, but most of the letters were typed, because when he got to Iran, he got a typewriter and he started typing with his left hand. And so most of his letters were typed, which was a godsend to me, because I could read them fairly well. The Hannah Smith letters that we'll talk about at the end of the talk were another matter, and some of you, as you came in, saw this poster board here where there's a lot of letters. This is just a dozen of them, but they are hard to read. Some of them are neatly scripted, some of them are not, some of them are faded. And at that era, most of these letters were written by teenage girls and young adult women. They often had just a fourth grade education. They were from farm families. And so the letters were difficult to read. Just some of them weren't legible. More often than not, no periods or no capitalization. Not no, but very little. Because if you were getting letters from Boston and the upper class, if you will, you might have some very fine letters in the early 1800s and at the time of the Revolution before that. But if you were out in farm country in Medfield and a simple farm family trying to survive, quite frankly, is very possible it's just a short elementary education that they had. So the Clem book, when I worked on it, and after about 4 years, I started to put together how I was going to put the book together, and that will be what I'm going to slide into almost momentarily. And I went to a talk down at Harwich on the Cape, where an author was writing fiction, and he talked about how you can publish your own book. And he had used a group called CreateSpace, which some of you may have heard of. It's an excellent organization that has been, it's now part of Amazon, and they served me to publish this book. I did chapters by sort of time periods, and after I selected the letters I wanted to use, and we'll talk about that shortly, I put these chapters, I had them all on the computer in separate files, and then I had to figure out how to get them all together. And I had learned about CreateSpace, and so I knew if I had a Word document that was neat and clean, I could have something that I could give to CreateSpace to get this book here. Clem worked in about 4 or 5 different places in Iran, and then he retired as he approached age 65 or so, 60, 65, and retired not back to his sisters and nieces and nephews in the United States, which you might think he'd do because he absolutely loved them and they loved him. But he came home and then he said, no, I need to be abroad. So he went to the Presbyterian mission in Cairo, Egypt, and served as a volunteer there for their mission service. And he served for 5 years doing that. We have several letters from him there. And then he died of a heart attack in his apartment in 1985, shortly after he had just over Christmas come back and visited his 2 sisters and his brother-in-law, and they were a very tight-knit family group, so he had that blessing of just at the end of his life having that time together. But then he went, and he died in a place that he loved. He loved both Cairo and he loved Iran, and that's pervasive in this book. And the title of the book is important to me because it says, A Good American in Iran. He was a good person. He served well. He liked being in Iran, which is important for us to know today with all the things that go on. He was able to laugh at some of their antics there, just like they laugh at our antics. But he was very respectful of them as a people. And he did do his 30 years of Christian service, which he was just, that's what he felt he was called to do in life. He told his mother, Mother, I know you want me back home, but this is where I need to be. I think I can help make the world a little better place here. Very, very dear man, and I got to know him well through the letters work. So I could spend a whole evening talking about this book, and I'm not going to do that because some of what I want to do is encourage you. First off, if you haven't already come across some family letters, you probably will at some point in your life, and sometimes there's the thought, I should just throw them out. And maybe you should, but probably not until after real good consideration, because there's a wealth of learning about the past and history and family and people in those letters. I've learned so much about Iran and the United States and Iran and world affairs because I was forced to because of going through Clem's letters. And now it's easier with the internet. If he referred to, at one point, this is an unbelievable story. At one point, he talked about an assassination that took place in 1954 or something in the rural Iran over near Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there was like a USAID, Agency for International Development agency there doing agricultural work. And there was an attack on the Americans similar like to the attacks that we fear at times today. And so he wrote to his mother, and there was an American worker several who were killed. And he wrote back to his mother and said, no, it wasn't near us, don't worry, I'm fine, people are fine with me here. So why do I tell this story? I went on the internet and I Googled the key words of that attack, which I couldn't have done 10 or 15 years ago. And it all came up, all the aspects of that incident. And so I said, okay, this is what Clem was referring to. He just had a sentence that referred to it. So we're very lucky to have the internet for research related to mysteries that come up in these books. I'm going to switch now Anybody have just a quick question about Clem before I switch to the general topic of letters and books? Yes, George?
Walter, how do you think he would feel today if he knew you had done this?
Well, I think he'd be very respectful and thankful. He'd be humbled because I don't have any doubt that I know him very well, and he was a humble person with a good soul. And the title of my book is Remembering Clem, because I want people to remember him, even if it's just the 15 people here, as a good person who lived a good life. And he had his complaints about his own country too. He was at times very upset about things that go on in America before I leave. But he would be happy, but he said, gee, you shouldn't have done that, but he'd understand why I did. Oh, I hope he knows I've done it. I'd never thought of that before. His family, the sisters and their children, have been very appreciative of it.
Did the sisters live to see you finish the book?
Not finish it, but they knew what I was doing, and they saw the biography of him that I had written, and they knew I was doing the book and making good progress with it, but they didn't see it finished, no. Some of their daughters were instrumental in helping me with the project, with their family knowledge and also encouragement. One of Marjorie's daughters lives in Arlington, and she was a close cohort of mine to help me through with this, because I had many questions. I read you the last page of the book. Now I'll read the first page of the book, which is, because I mentioned that Clem had his criticisms of the United States too. So listen to this. This was written in 1953. Quote from Clement Scott Jr. in one of his letters. A letter to his sister Marjorie from Tehran, August 16th, 1953. Whether Americans like it or not, the rest of the world is watching America, some in hope and some in fear. What do we say today? Maybe we focus more on the fear, but I think actually his statement is true. I mean, many people in the world look to us with hope, but many look with fear. And he's writing this in 1953. When I read that, it's like, whoa, it's like mind-boggling. Just a sentence from a letter. Okay, so now the middle section here we're coming to, I want to, I think we'll do first, could you sort of hand these around a little? These are handouts. I do the old style, okay? Some old letters found in the attic, and we'll sort of talk our way, if you just pass this to this side here, talk our way through that. I better grab one for myself too. Thanks. What I wanted to do tonight was not just talk about my two books, but talk about, well, what happens if you come across some letters or some documents. And for an example, I say documents because George Fisk is here tonight. And 2 months ago, my wife and I have kept original deeds to our 200-year-old house that's on Fisk Street in Holliston. And since George Fisk is Fisk, we've known him for years, but I wanted to reconnect him to the Fisk family. And he helped me with some ideas about the Fisk farm history that I've done. It's just a 5-page history through the last, just before Christmas I was working on it. But Carol and I have the original deeds to our house from the Registry of Deeds from around 1813 or so, and then going back to 1793. We have those deeds, and we got those after we moved to this old house back in 1975, and we've been restoring this house for many, many, many years. And we got the deeds, and then we get other information about Eastern Nursery, which was the nursery, which was the complex where our house was, and we'd put them in a file. And so we might do something with it, and we wanted to understand more about our house. Well, we never did anything until we get to this point in our life where we're considering that we have to downsize. And I'm thinking, geez, I should take a look at some of this stuff I've got on the Fisk farm. And so I went to these original deeds, which I read 30 years ago, but I couldn't really absorb them then because I was professional, I was working, I didn't have time. And I started to go at them with a magnifying glass and I transcribed them. And then George had some family genealogies, which were very important. And then the Sherborn Public Library had a great, I'm going to miss the name of it, but Morse perhaps. There's a document about Sherborn and Holliston history, so I used that, and Liz helped me get that. But if I hadn't kept those old deeds that we made copies of, I'm sort of organized. You wouldn't think that looking at my desk, but I'm pretty organized in keeping things in folders. And so I pulled that out, and I was able to put together a 5-page short history of the Fisk farm in Holliston, which is a fascinating history. And I got to know the family who lived in our house in 1815, when there was a big storm that blew down a lot of trees and changed the life of this family. That's another story, so I won't go there. The idea is that it doesn't need to be letters. It can be documents, and deeds are some documents like that. So I want to sketch through this to help you, because people ask me, well, how do you, what do I do with the letters? So we can sort of talk and walk through this. Reading them, assuming they're legible. Now, I have to say, Hannah Smith's letters were not legible. Now, you're not going to believe this, but there are only, this book says Hannah Smith, and it's a pretty formal book. And it says, to Mary E. Devlin from Julia D. Scott, Christmas 2002. These people, one of them is Carol's great-great-grandmother, and they had all the letters that I ended up getting at the bottom of this trunk here. And Julia Draper Davis Scott was married to the president of Century Publishing Company in New York City, which was an influential publishing company that burst out of the 1870s, post-Civil War period, when suddenly, you know, publishing was becoming a much bigger thing than it was before the Civil War. So I don't know the exact history of this, but when I see a gilt set up here, and there's another cousin who has one of these, and I know there are only 2 of them. It wasn't a published work. I'll just sort of, what I have here is the Hannah Smith letters, which you see in this book here. When I got the Hannah Smith letters, I didn't know this book was existent. And either she or a secretary for the Century Publishing Company, I don't know who, typed all the letters, not in order, but the best they could. And so this was, and the letter as you see them here is not what you'll see in my book, because my book is exactly as Hannah and her sisters wrote them. If there was no capital, there was no capital. If there was no period, there's no period. Because I'm a historian, amateur historian, but I believe it's a document that we should read as it was written. They did a pretty good job, and it meant that I could, and they did about 90% of the letters that I have. So I was able to reference this with the scribble that I was seeing. I shouldn't say that. Some of the women wrote neatly, but most of them it was teenage sort of scribble. And without this book here, this is a salient point of my talk, in different generations, different people do different things. Without this book here, which is a humble book, but I think is a very important historical book for Medfield and this whole region about bonnets, we'll talk about it at the end, the last section, this book could not have been written, because I would have been buried trying to figure out, some of you looked at this stuff when you came in, which is gorgeous. And so this is an example of a letters book at a certain stage, certainly by a woman who had the liberty and the connection, I'm sure, to the Century Publishing Company that it could be done. But it's...
So are you saying that book, they didn't just transcribe it, they put in the punctuation and the...
They did the best they could, and I think, I'm not sure, I can't say that, I have to be cautious with this because I haven't looked at this for a number of years, but there were mistakes in it, and some of them were just mistakes. Because when I went through them. I was with a magnifying glass and everything. If I had questions, I checked with someone at Old Sturbridge Village. And so I did a lot deeper work. But they typed the best they could at that time. They didn't organize them by date at all, so they're all mixed up, whereas my book, I spent a lot of time figuring them out. Only 3/4 of them had dates, so I had to figure out from context clues, which you can actually do. But this book I'm going to hand around. Just treat it delicately, but it's a gorgeous book. And it was as I say, I couldn't have done my work without that. So I have a number of questions here that probably you've sort of drifted through as I've been rambling on here. Number 3, are there enough letters for a book? What's the goal? To preserve a personal history in some manner? For me, I very much was preserving a personal history. Hannah, I got to know very well, and her family, their travails. They had good times and very difficult times. And Clem likewise. So personal history, but also if you have letters, I think it's nice to try to weave it into the social history of the times. In both of my books, I do that. First, set them in acid-free and lignin-free folders to avoid degradation. And I have a reference here for university products. You can get them if you ever have letters. Just get them into acid-free folders early so that they are protected. So you have to read them, order them by date, decide if all will be transcribed or whether if you're going to have to select some. With Hannah Smith, I made a commitment. There's about 140 documents, and I said every single one of them will be there. So in the Hannah Smith book, I don't think it's in color, but one of the letters wasn't a letter. It was just this little drawing here that is colored, you see in the center here. And that is in the book, just because it was a beautiful piece of artwork. Somebody had taken the time. There actually is a name in there. There's a name in it too, so I think it's this one here, to a friend, yeah. So decide if you're going to, Hannah Smith, with that number, I could do all the books, and I felt like I was serving history well to do that, because here it is. This is what we know about Hannah Smith. And I didn't take anything out. And some of the letters are very vacuous, you know, there's not that much really deep information, but they're a bunch of teenage girls who are talking to each other through letters.
You have to say you have to unfold them.
What?
You have to unfold them. So they must-
My wife informs me that unfold them first. Yeah, well, they are, yeah, they can be folded, they can be in envelopes. Yeah, oh, right, yeah, that's a good point in terms of when you file them, yep. So you're going to end up reading the letters several times. With the Hannah Smith letters, I'm sure I read them 4 or 5 times. You got to get the dated ones. I'm down at number 7, getting them, how the undated ones, set those aside and try to lay them in afterwards using context clues. Number 8, determine who your audience will be. My audience in both cases was a family, but also I was thinking historians would be interested in the history of Medfield and history of straw braiding and bonnets, which was a boom industry right in this area 200 years ago. It was a way that women could get out and earn some money as opposed to just staying on the farm. They might stay on the farm, but they could go to a neighbor or neighboring town and work and work in the bonnet industry. A numbering system, this is number 9. A numbering system is very important because you need to get some way to designate what the document is in your document. So with Hannah Smith, I said, what was the source of the documents? They came from several places, no, hers were not. No, Clems, I had some that were coming from Reddy and some were coming from Marjorie and the mother. So I have the MM letters, Marjorie and mother, and the Reddy or Henrietta, H or R, whichever I used, which was those. So then I had all of MM letters numbered, and then I had all the Reddy letters numbered, and then I married them and got them into order. But the letters in the book, in this book here, if I open it up, I'll see a MM 258. That's the title of the letter, MM. And then there'll be some H's or R's depending upon where we are in the book. More earlier. Oh, H 2, 3, 4 I'm seeing. So that tells me, okay, this is I got this from Henrietta. That was important to me, where the letter came from. I don't even remember what I did in this one. Hannah Smith. See, Hannah Smith. I have a system. I wish I could tell you what it was right now. That's funny. C12, EHS 71. That's ancient history.
Question about
Yes.
that? Just from the point of view of organizing, when you had numerous authors.
Yeah.
So you used their initials
Yeah.
to denote who wrote the letter. But in some of those letters, I understand they were to different people. I'm talking about Clem.
Oh, Clem.
Yeah, so, you have letters from Clem to his mother, to his sister.
All his letters, the writer was always Clem. Never the sisters. It was all one way, from abroad to the United States.
Oh, so you had none of the letters back to him?
None of the letters back, no.
Oh, and
Good question.
Did you denote them as Clem to mother, Clem to sister?
Yeah, I noted the source of them. Did it come from Mother and Marjorie, the sister, or did it come from Henrietta? Beyond that, you immediately see he always has a salutation. So you see immediately, dear L and M, that's Leet and Marjorie, that's the couple. Marjorie's husband was Leet. So people reading this, and that's described in the introduction how I did that. MM is Mother and Marjorie, and then you see dear Marjorie and Leet. My code is for the sourcing of who got them to me.
And, I see.
And then you can see who is the player in terms of who it's addressed to right in the salutation.
And so in your numbering system, you just numbered them in order of date?
Then the numbering system, let me just make sure.
Like 1, 2, 3, 4, but it could be January, March, December, like they're all different dates, but you did them chronologically is what I meant.
They're all put in chronological order, and in 120. But I had to, in this book, unlike the Hannah Smith book, I had to select out 300 because I had 600 letters, 650 letters. So I had to take out a number of them. So these go in order, but they have gaps. So you'll see MM 193, and then you might see you got an H8. Okay, so that's demonstrating MM 194, and then H8. But they are sequenced by date. Right. Okay, sequenced by date. And so that was a big task to make sure they got in, and that's very important to have them by date. And the Hannah Smith letters, they're by date too. I don't totally remember all the coding that I did there. But it's important to have some structuring of the code, and I think it's important to have your letters chronological if they come from different sources, yes.
Did you ever use only a part of a letter?
With Hannah Smith, no. With Clem, yes. In the beginning, not so much, but as it actually, the task became so daunting at the end. I had to put the project down for about 9 months because I sort of ran into a wall that I wanted to represent him fully, but I had to decide, one, to take out some letters. So then I had to decide the basis for doing that. Some of the letters were too much just family stuff, and I wanted to have it for the greater public too. Some of them had some family stuff, but some very salient things about Iran, and I was very focused on Iran and America and an individual in that matrix of those two countries. So that was sort of my guide. And if there was a lot of stuff about who's doing what this summer or what was going on at Thanksgiving and Christmas, that was selected out. Not always, sometimes it was in there because it was important. That is a very challenging task to decide what to not put in.
What I'm finding interesting is the Clem one is letters from Clem. The one
That's
here
correct.
is letters to Hannah.
Yes,
so it's
correct.
sort of the opposite.
Yeah, they're different, and I'm glad you raised that because some people, when they see the name Hannah Smith, the Medfield girl, they assume she wrote a bunch of letters. There are about 3 to 5 letters from her, but basically what's happening, she went out, she was the oldest sister, she went out, we're going to get into this, working in the bonnet industry in Dedham and Walpole, surrounding towns. And her sisters, younger, were writing, oh, I want to do that too. This is what's going on here. And so-and-so is sick, so-and-so died, so-and-so's fallen in love. We're going to the Singing Master this weekend, and we're working on Winter in Denmark. Those are the songs they were working on. So great question. Yeah, they're two different books that way. But they both paint a picture of an individual's life, even though they're very different.
I was just given a whole, like this many letters. My sister, she bought me a computer and said, if you'll do my family, I'll give you a computer. So I said, okay. So she just sent me all these letters. Her husband had a brother who died in the Second World War, and these are all the letters he wrote home during that 4-year period.
Wow.
And almost like he wrote every day.
Wow. Wow.
And they sent me all of them.
Yeah. Well, there's a
All of them.
gentleman in Medfield, Mass, who has been very helpful for me when I did Hannah Smith. Rob Gregg is his name, and he has all the letters from some of you may know him. He has all the letters from his father, his father and mother got married just before the war. His father shipped out to the war and was fighting in the war in artillery service in Europe through World War II, writing home to his mother constantly, to Rob's mother. And Rob, he didn't do a book with them, but he has given talks around Eastern Massachusetts about military letters coming home, and he's an extraordinary historian, and he knows how to work with letters in a little different way. Yeah. So just flipping through to another, I use this dot system. You can just use 1 to 5 or something. You have to prioritize which letter you might include. And I just did a 1 dot for, I can't remember if 1 dot was great or 1 dot was, I think 5 dots were powerhouse, we wanted to use them. And 1 dot was I didn't need. And I just use little color taggies on those letters. The letters from Clem, the letters from Clem, I did put color tags on them so I could write something on the letter that wasn't on the letter. But some historians wouldn't want to do that, but I did do that because I didn't want to write on the letter, so I just got a little circle tag colors and mark the letters that way. The Hannah Smith letters, I was doing them all, so I didn't have to gauge what the value of them. They were all valuable. Set up a book structure. You're going to do an introduction. I wanted to help the reader understand what was going on, and so there's an important introduction in Hannah Smith. It's an important introduction in Remembering Clem. Hannah Smith has a whole introduction section about the history of Medfield at this time. And Medfield has just got rich historical background. There's a guy, Richard de Sorger, who was a history teacher who's written several books. Some of you know him. He's since moved down to Plymouth area somewhere. Ashby, okay. But his books on Medfield history were invaluable to my work. And then there were other historians a century ago who did a lot of history and genealogy on Medfield. So set the book structure, introduction planned. With Clem's book, I had sections, and in each section, I'd do my introduction where I could weave, this is what you're going to be reading. And for many people, if they get my book, I tell them, you may end up just reading the introductions and a few letters, because the letters can become sort of tiresome. There's 400 pages of letters here. And sometimes Clem repeated himself, and I tried to avoid that, but he has some repetition. But family, they've read, many of them read the whole book, and they're just so thankful. They say, oh, wow, I can see it all. Because there was only one set of letters. So if Reddy and Margie decide, oh, I'll give them to this daughter or so-and-so, they'd probably end up in a trunk or something for another generation. Now they can see it. And two of Clem's nieces helped me edit this, and as well as Carol, my wife. And so that gets into the editing side that we'll talk about later. And I say fire up the computer and get typing. The transcribing can be easy, but laying the letters into some helpful educational purpose, which is what I do, will take much time and thought. Like, why are you writing this book? Do you just want to document these letters, or do you want to help people understand something? I wasn't retired when I did Hannah Smith, but I did a lot of weekend work on it. And with Clem, I was retired, so I was able to dedicate a lot of time to it, and I really did need to. I should be thinking about some self-publishing things, entities. And I say at the end, many authors set up websites. When you go home tonight or through the next week, take the time to go look at hannahsmithofmedfield.com. It's a nice little website that gives some neat information about her. It tells you how you can buy a book, but you can just learn about her that way too, or you can get a book tonight if you want one also. And then rememberingclem.com is a mountain of a website. One of my sons helped me with Hannah Smith. I had all the information I had that I wanted, but I couldn't put it onto a website. He came in about 2 hours, boom, it was there, which was really neat. I don't have that skill. The Remembering Clem website is just got a ton of information, and some of it is about American history and Clem's relationship to American history. There's a section of it called Clem and the American Story, which if you do anything, that's the last subsection over on the right. You might go to that. I've still got a little bit more to do on it, but it paints a picture of one American connected back through many generations to all the way back to the founding of our country. The New England founding of our country, I should say, because we have New England roots. And that I mentioned the computer aspect of things. With this, I did it on an Apple, and I took it to Ad Print in Medway, which is a print company, and they told me what they needed, and they said, I can put this into a book for you, just off an Apple hard copy. They produced it, turned it into a book. I did the cover, and they said they could do that. So this was a very primitive way of doing a book. This here, we have a very good friend and neighbor, Jillian Curran is her name, who is a computing consultant. And she came into our neighborhood just as I was working on this book. And she had heard of CreateSpace a little bit, but she wanted to work on this with me because she wanted to learn how self-publishing works and print on demand. This is called Print on Demand from Amazon. I can contact them by email tonight and order 5 books tomorrow if I want. And they will send them to me for about $5.50 each, because they do it to me in cost. They sell them for $25 on their site. They haven't made a lot of money on it because it's not a book burner. I mean, it's not a bestseller. But they are looking for suddenly the explosive book that comes along. Plus, I think Amazon does a lot of lost leader stuff. I mean, they lose money. Somebody earns some money, but they lose money. They certainly lost money on me. So I had a consultant. I can do good word processing. I can work pretty well with the computer. If things get out of hand, sometimes I ask Carol to come over and say, help! And she's good with troubleshooting some stuff. But Jillian Curran, our neighbor, was extraordinary. And she was my intermediary with CreateSpace. And we'll turn to the producing a book and self-publishing. Let's hand this out. Let's pass some of these along. And
So when you had the
here, I'm going to give you
picture.
And George, I'm going to put this down for you, okay?
Thank you.
How did you do that? Did you scan it in?
This picture here, it didn't go into my book in color. It just went in black and white. Here you go. Yeah, this is self-publishing considerations, my experience, and everybody's experience will be different. Jane, there you go. Got one there. You've got one already. Okay, good. And self-publishing, there's, you've seen this. This is one self-publishing. You've seen this here, which is with CreateSpace. There's, let me see if I'm going to do, this is, I have a good friend, this is someone from, might be Sherborn, Bill Miller, you might know him. Hollis Library 10 years ago had a author's afternoon on a Saturday, and there's a guy from nearby here, Heroes and Hounds, and he put together a children's book about horse riding. I'll pass this around. You might know him, I don't know. I just met him that one day. Coming the other direction is Joanne Hulbert, who's a historian in Holliston, put together Holliston, a Good Town, that some of you might know about. And I'll send this around on this side. Take a look at it. She did that about 10 years ago. And I don't know all the details of how she published that, but it was basically her product. Another one, this is the only other one I have with CreateSpace that I'm going to talk about a little bit, the CreateSpace portal. This is called Brooklyn, New York to Bacaiuva, Brazil. And this is a good friend of mine who was in the Peace Corps when Carol and I were in the Peace Corps back in the late 60s and early 70s, Frank Rothman. He married a Brazilian woman, and he's a Jewish person from Brooklyn, New York. And so it's a Catholic farm family in Brooklyn marriage, which is fascinating. And they're coming up to their 50th wedding anniversary and had children. And when he was often thinking about telling his story about going to Brazil in the Peace Corps and then meeting the love of his life and how all that happened. And he tells about his Peace Corps experience. And he heard from me, we don't see each other that often, but he knew that I had put this book together, and he knew I was working on the Clem book. And he said, and I told him about CreateSpace, and he said, oh, I'm going to try to use that. And since he was a Peace Corps volunteer, the Peace Corps, if you write a book about the Peace Corps, they will help you with the interface, the technology interface and advice with CreateSpace. I had my neighbor who was doing it pretty much gratis. I mean, we paid some, but it was mostly, she was having fun with it too. And she was learning the process. With Frank, he used the Peace Corps Writers Support Service and their editing service. So I'll pass this one around over here. So this is a CreateSpace book. It's the only other CreateSpace book that I have. My cousin wrote a novel that was about 600 pages long using CreateSpace, so fiction, and it was a book like this. And she had good experience with it too. So when I say CreateSpace, it's because I have myself and two other people who really found it a very beneficial venue for putting together your book. So again, I'm going to just scan through this that some of you may have looked at already and just highlight a few things. Keep contact with local libraries. Sometimes they have author shares where authors will share about how they're publishing. Granted, just like tonight. But now, remember, my experience is already a little bit dated. So in the next year or two, if some of you end up doing something with letters, for the next 5 years, I'd strongly encourage you to touch base with the library, see if any authors are talking about how they're publishing. Sometimes publishers come, or publishing consultants come. Like a publishing consultant came to the Hollis Library to say basically how she could connect you to a publisher. Now, I couldn't do that because there's a lot of stuff going on there, and the chance of you really getting a publisher to go to town with your book is pretty slim. So for me, self-publishing is the route to go. I mean, I would not be able to get a publisher to do this unless a miracle happened tomorrow and they saw the Hollis TV, local access TV here, and they said, oh my God, that one is going to really fly. We've got to do some promotion of that. Thank you for being here, Bruce. I appreciate it. And Bruce is here not because the library initially invited him, it's because I gave copies of my book to somebody in Holliston, and who's a businesswoman in Holliston, and she said, oh, my husband's going to be interested in this and your talk, because he works with Holliston Cable Access TV. So then that's the connection that came, because I gave the book to a friend and businesswoman in Holliston. Okay, so what are some of the highlights here? Writers groups, possibilities. It says who I got my direction on from. I mentioned CreateSpace. 24/7 support. Anytime I could call them. They're absolutely incredible. And no wait time. And I didn't always get the same, I seldom got the same person, but they could key into the discussion of the previous person with me, and they could be right on to my question. And we had some battles with them at the end because we couldn't get the right color for the cover, and we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And there was one section inside that wasn't printing right. It's where the pictures were. And they finally they said, well, we'll shop this out to some consultants, figure out what's going on. They got back to me, and they were able to put, this book is pretty complicated in terms of a lot of pictorials. It's got maps, it's got graphs and things in it. Let me just have one of these going around, sorry. Start this over here. Start this here, just so that you can be looking at one sample of a CreateSpace book there. You'll see it's a pretty complicated book to put together. The idea of editors, I'm fairly proud of me reading my own material, but you need to have an editor because you just miss stuff, and also just different eyes coming upon things. Often what I was writing, I'd show to Carol before I said, okay, I think I'm set for the book. But then when I put it all together, so she had seen it as separate eyes, but then when I put the whole book together, I had two of Carol's cousins, Clem's nieces, one from New York and one from Arlington, who agreed to read through just for the family project, and that was absolutely essential. Even after they had edited it, I had to go through it again 4 or 5 times because I'd find little nitpicky things that I wasn't happy with.
So why didn't you use a CreateSpace editor?
Because I'm cheap. CreateSpace will give you an editor, and they'll bill you for it. And also I felt that I did feel that I had the resources. I knew I had the family support. I spoke to several good friends, and they said they couldn't do it, and that was the right thing because it is a labor of love to edit a book like this. So you can use a commercial one, and I'm sure they're very good. Frank, who did the Brazil book, he used the Peace Corps editing service. He had to pay something for that, but I think it was reasonable because it was Peace Corps. But I think it's best to have someone who you respect who might help you out and be part of the project. But you do need editors, 1 or 2. With this book here, every time I probably ran about 4 books in preliminary stages, and then I thought I'd be getting towards the edits and the final edits. I did about 5 or 6 final edits of this because every time I got it back, I said, I've got to read a little bit more. I skimmed that other section, even though the editors had looked at it and I had really come through it. And it was lucky I did it because the last thing you want is to have some real big goofy in it. And I am pleased that some people who have really read this front to back carefully said, Walter, it's nice. There's no, I didn't see any errors in it. And now one of you might find an error, but it's pretty clean, and it took a lot of effort. And it was very frustrating at the end because I'd get the book that I thought was going to be the final one where I could say, okay, push the button and print. And I'd say, oh no, look at that. And so with CreateSpace, it's not hard. You submit the correction, and they put it in, and they show it to you, say, is this what you want? And then, do you want one final one to look at? Yeah, I want a final one to look at. And you look at it, and it's good, and then you can run and have a bunch made.
What was the beginning to the end of that process for you, time-wise, with CreateSpace?
I didn't hear it.
How long did it take you with CreateSpace?
Yeah.
How much time did you spend with them? Was it months?
Oh, you mean for the whole project?
With CreateSpace,
Yeah.
Once you got it written, I guess.
Yeah, right, yeah. I had it written in Word, and then we had to figure out what sizing we were going to use because Word is set up for this paper. We had to figure out what the size was going to be, what the point print was going to be, the point size. I probably worked with CreateSpace at least a year, may have been 15 months. There was a lot to do because they had to, when I first sort of spec'd out what it was going to be, I was using a larger point. This is printed quite small, you'll notice, because I wanted a book that you could feel comfortable holding, but it's not always real comfortable reading for those of us who the eyes get harder. I've had some people tell me that, but for me it was most important to get it in a holdable book. My cousin who wrote the novel this novel is about 600-700 pages long, and it is so thick like this. I've read it, but if she'd changed the point size, it would have gotten much thinner. Or if she changed the size of it to something more like this, but she had a more blocky book. And for me, how it feels when you hold it it's an important thing. But probably 15 months or so. There was a lot of work to do because they had to help me with how we, and then the cover, my tech person is quite artistic too. I had the concept for it. She was able to put it together. You've got to process the cover through Create Space. That relates to the binding back here, how that's going to set up. So a lot of details. I just
Do you
guess.
give it to them copy ready, or do they help you with the formatting, or a template? Or?
Well, I knew what I wanted for the formatting, but the sizing template, I had to work through my tech person and Create Space. So you have the interface with Create Space, and they would tell my tech person, okay, if you want this size book, this will work. You have to work the margins and everything, how that would work. I gave a guidance to my tech person. This is how I want it to look and to feel, because I'm pretty particular about that. And as you look at this as it goes around, I think you'll see, it's got the space in here that you need.
You say your tech person, I'm sorry, do you mean your tech person at Create Space?
No, my tech person who was my neighbor, who was running a techie business, consulting with people who needed help with their computer work and stuff. I hate to say it, but particularly with elderly people who aren't as at ease with computers.
Was available if one of us needed help?
Well, she's listed in several things here. Oh, and this here, Jillian Curran at jilliancurran@jilliancurran.com. Right now, she's not doing the technical consulting because she's working over at the Medfield. What's the name of the club over there? The tennis club. Kingsbury. Thank you, Kingsbury. Yeah, she's working there right now, and she's not doing so much tech work. I think she may get back into it in the coming year. She's very good at it. When I published, she was full time at this tech work, but she's needed to sort of get a real job for a while, something like that. But I have a sense she'll be getting back into it some, and so I need to go.
Just one more
Yep,
question
go
about
ahead.
that typeface.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen your book yet.
Yeah.
To see how many actual letters you included in the book,
Yeah, there are about 350 letters.
the actual copies of them, or
No. Oh no, I typed them. It's all typed.
Right.
All typed. I did all the typing.
so you didn't make that choice to include any of the original letters.
Only two or three pictures in the center. There are 2 or 3 pictures of
And
them.
I wonder if that's also because it's difficult to scan letters to be legible in a.
No, they could do it. Yeah, there are pictures in here of some letters. You can. I don't need this for the rest of this evening. I don't think.
Did you
So,
scan them, or did you?
the scanning of those, I think that Jillian scanned those because she's got a better machine than me. But even our machine picks up the letters pretty well. But I think she probably did it for that quality. So yeah, I basically had a lot of typing to do for both of these books, and I don't mind that. Okay, you can read this at home too. Transferring Word. Oh, the type. You mentioned the type. What sort of type do you use? I don't get too into that. Some publishers really like, well, what sort of type do you want? I just do like New Times Roman. That's fine, and I'm comfortable with it. I didn't do any fancy stuff on type.
So when you were typing, were you
Yeah.
just typing them as 9 by 12 regular
Yeah,
sheets?
yeah.
And
Just
did you have to change the format to upload it to Create Space?
no. They took it, and what I like this page here would be how it shows in the book.
Okay.
They do that through through their skill set and their technology person, or in my case, my technology person. That wasn't hard to do.
I'm going to throw out a random piece of information here. If you have a glossy cover, it curls. If you have a matte cover, it
Yeah.
doesn't.
My friend, yeah, you wouldn't think that, but yeah, it's a small point. Thanks for pointing that out. It's very important. I'm going to quickly, let's see if there's other highlights here. Cover design. Many authors have an artist help them out with that. I knew what I wanted, and Jillian helped me setting it up. Setting the price, you set the price, figure out what it costs, and then decide on a price. I just looked at a number of books and I put down around $25 for, I think for Hannah Smith it was $22, and for Remembering Clem $25, because I was going to spend, I know they charged me $5 a book. So that's pretty much autonomous decision that you can make if you see what books go for. And you're not going to make any money anyway. You're just going to lose money. So if you think you're going to make money, it's more the fun of it, I think, and also impacting some people's lives and reminding some people that some people lived in the past who are important, even though we're just simple people like you and me.
Did they tell you though when you're doing your formatting, like you type, like the page you showed us?
Yep.
They tell you to do a certain size because when you reduce it, so
No, they didn't. No, they show you what it's going to look like. I mean, when you put it under Create Space, it pops up on the screen and you see what it's going to look like. It's it's right there, and you can say, "Yep, this is going to work," and they'll print a sample for you for $5, and they send it to you, and you say, "Okay, this is looking good."
and you just send it to them on a flash drive or something, or you somehow.
Yeah, it's direct. Jillian she and I had the password to operate on it, and she could call a number and say, I want to work on this right now with you, with consulting, and it would be up on the screen, and they could talk it, interface easily. I can't remember all the details of it, but they're very good. Yeah, ordering for distribution, these are things, I mean, I always have 25, 30 books around. And frankly, I tend to give mine away or give them to, some people buy them, I give them for donations, so they sort of keep me funded so I can keep working on this. And that works well for me. Different people would do it different ways. Let's see. Promotion, I just mentioned the website, and that's hard to do, but and many of you wouldn't do that. But for me, it was very good because all of Clem's family now, they have the book, but they also, as I expand Clem's story, they can go online and just they're seeing photographs of their aunts and uncles and cousins and Clem in situations that aren't in the book that they never saw. I had these photographs that Marjorie and Reddy gave me, and I can put them up on a website, whereas I can't put them all into the book. So the website has been very good for me, and sometimes, actually, I think there's going to be a Boston Globe article on this, on this presentation. Liz got me in contact with a reporter from the Globe, Isabel Kemp, and she's been interviewing me for the last week about this presentation. She couldn't be here tonight, but I think it's on the Sunday the 24th, there should be an article about this presentation, so, and about my work. And so the reason I mentioned that is I told her, Isabel, I said, I've sent you some stuff, we've talked, but just go onto my website and you can get a much more comprehensive view of the Clem project. I need to switch over now to Hannah Smith, and I'm going to I do it very quickly because it's my first project, and to do it justice, I'd have to do an hour and a half, but some of you may not publish books, so I'm going to give you two books. This is an alternative. Just pamphlets like this are good. This is Hannah's line a year or two after I got, this is Hannah Smith. After I got the letters, I had a big family gathering, and we went over to Medfield Cemetery where some of the family is buried. We had a luncheon at our house, and I handed out these things that were all in this trunk here. So as a preliminary to the Hannah Smith book, you can just share that going around. And this is, now this is not a joke, but this is Grandpa, that's me. I'm interested in short histories. So I wrote a short history of the world for Taylor, that's our oldest granddaughter, and it's dated 2008 to 2013. And it's my history of the world from humans emanating out of Africa and going over to Asia and going up into Europe. And Taylor is of mixed race heritage. Her son is our oldest son. Her father is our oldest son. I'm not sure what I said. And her mother is of Taiwanese, is a child of Taiwanese immigrants who came here in the 1960s or so. And so she's of two heritages. So this is a history of the world. At the end of this, Taylor's grandparents are flying over California and coming down into the East Coast of the United States. And Carol and I are here with our son Seth well, not yet, but our son with Carol and I are here. And these two cultures, the European culture that we usually have our history about, and the Taiwanese culture come together. So there was this idea of integrating world history beyond the American thing. So, but I show this not for you to get, brush up on your world history, but for seeing how you can put a pamphlet together in a nice way. So I'll pass this around you.
I would like to really mention that when we used to do these Holliston historical days, we would show kids like little booklets from, 1871.
Yeah.
And I would say, the books that you have are the history of tomorrow.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do write, I'm sorry to say, a Christmas letter every year.
Yeah.
And I know the people who get it don't read it. But that's okay, because for the last 15, 20 years, my kids have their history.
Yeah.
So I'm not writing it really for, Lynn in Ohio.
Yeah.
I'm writing it so that these kids, so we are making the history for those letters for our kids and our future.
A book of Christmas letters.
And email, I have emails that one of my sons wrote to me, in an airport, for example. And that's kept in a little separate folder over there of great things my kids wrote to me.
This is good.
So, we are creating the history that you are dealing with that. Somebody will deal with it.
It's going to be tougher with emails unless we print them out, but we are going to, people will be scanning the history that way. I'm going to have to wrap it up. I've got a few more minutes that I'm going to do here, and then we're going to wrap it up. But with Hannah Smith, I got all these letters, and I put them together into a book. She had an extraordinary life where she went out and worked on, it was a farm family in Medfield, worked on bonnets. There was a young girl in Dedham or in northern Rhode Island, depending upon which history you want to read, who around 1810 took apart a bonnet from London, and she was just a teenage kid, and took it apart and said, oh, this is how they make these bonnets that people wear in Boston that they pay a lot of money for. And then she took apart the braid and said, oh, this is how they braid. This is how they braid it. And she started to tell her friends how you can make this braid and then make bonnets. And an industry exploded here in eastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island based on rye straw. And families would have their yard outside the house drying straw that would be set up for braiding. And so the Hannah Smith letters, when she was talking about braiding, I didn't know what she was talking about. I had to do a lot of research. But I found out what the story was, did a lot of research, and Hannah got married. She had 4 children. One of their children died young. She lived to age 32. She had her 4th child, and she died childbirth related. And the child died within a month or so after she passed away. So she died at age 32. And just at the brink of a potentially beautiful life with her husband. He had come out of the farms of Dedham, but he took his cattle into Alston, Brighton, which used to be cattle country for exchange and trade. And he did well, and then he decided to put beef on boats. This is in the 1820s and 30s. And he shipped down to the Caribbean, and I think it was more Caribbean trade. And he did well. He became what you'd call a Boston merchant, and he did well. But his wife died young. She had her children. She was a woman of hope and everything, I'm sure. And then it stopped for her. She kept all these letters that her sisters had written to her, and she kept them. And they must have gone to her. I can surmise that they went to her, probably to her mother initially, and then to her daughter, and then passing on. And there is I'm going to run out of time, but this here is actually a map of where you can look at it afterwards for a few minutes. These letters started in Medfield, ended up in Holliston, but they went to all these other places of Carol's family first. And it's a miracle that this happened, because if Carol and I lived in California, this book wouldn't get written, because I needed the Eastern Massachusetts resources. I needed the resources from the Historical Society in Medfield. But these are where these letters went, mostly in this trunk. So Hannah got these letters from her sister, and they're basically talking about singing was coming back then. The puritanical quashing of singing was dying off then in the early 1800s. Singing groups were coming in, and these girls were known as the singing Smiths of Medfield to family historians later. The letters were just in a little packet like this, wrapped up in a ribbon in the bottom of this trunk, and when Carol's dad died, we got the trunk, we looked through a bunch of photographs and stuff, got down to the bottom, saw this, and we said, what's this? And I was a history major in college and didn't do a lot with history. Actually, in my teaching career, I was involved with bilingual education, but more than history, I did some. But my history inclination took hold, and I went and I started to read them. And I was intrigued, and I basically got addicted to it, read them. This book came after about 6 months. This book here that's going around, which is somewhere here, which is important that I find that at the end. And so that helped me, and then I decided to write the book. So I can't tell you the whole Hannah Smith story, but as part of the book, I did a map of Medfield as it was at that time, around 1812. Before I wrap it up, I'm going to read just one letter from the Hannah Smith letters, because it'll make you understand things. This is spring of 1815 or 1817, and Hannah's writing to, to Hannah Smith. Her mother is the first one. She says, Hannah, I should be glad to hear from you. You might send a letter by the baker. Mails were just starting at that point, mail system. I cannot be reconciled to having Samuel go on the water. Samuel ended up, her brother, going to sea, and after he was married, and he died at sea somewhere. But they did have a child who has brought progeny down to the present date. Samuel will go in the water, so he must be thinking about sailing. He says he shall go. I want to know how straw goes over there. Our school is done now. The winter term is finished. That's my parentheses. I keep my girls to braiding. So your younger sisters are braiding. Be sure to write the first chance you have. Now, two letters in one here. Hannah's sister, 2 years younger than her, Sally, who wrote most of the letters in the book, not most, but she was the most communicative with Hannah, writes this. This is a powerful letter. Will relate to your lives and our lives today. The folks are all gone. This is continued by Sally Smith. The folks are all gone to bed, and I am left alone to finish the family letter. But I don't feel much like writing anything. It appears to me that the world is going to turn over, but I hope it won't fall tonight, and perhaps it will be right in the morning. 200 years ago, almost exactly. I have thought this day or two, if I had wings, I would fly to some unknown country where I should never be heard from again. I believe if I were in the meeting house, which is the church, if I were in the meeting house tonight, I should scream louder than ever. There was a crisis in the church. There was a division as the Baptists came in, and the Unitarian development and the Congregationalist, the puritanical aspect was disappearing or threatened. I have thought some of coming to see you next week. I can get there anyway, and perhaps I shall stay all the week. I have got our web in now, and I shall bring your cloth over if I come. The web is, she's weaving. So they've got the loom, the web in of the loom. I know that now because Carol is a weaver. At this time, she hadn't gotten into weaving. So that is an example of a letter where you can just, it just resonates how, you know, we're very different, but very much the same. And this is just a young 17-year-old girl who's certainly very frustrated about some things that are going on in the church and in the town, and just life was challenging then. Sometimes we romanticize the past. We shouldn't, but they had good times and they had very challenging times. I'm going to cut off because I know we're. Oh, can I ask if someone has a question? Yeah. I have just time for a couple of questions. I've done that. I've shown the straw. Yeah, I've demonstrated. I can. What? I told them. Yeah, yeah, they know. This is from our house. If you didn't hear, I told a few people. That is found in our house 2 years after I published the book. So someone was braiding straw in our 200-year-old house in Holliston. The exact same thing that Hannah was doing. It's like, this is unbelievable. If we have a question or two, I'd be happy to try to answer them. We've covered a lot, and I hope you take what I gave you and just take it home and enjoy it, absorb it. You could feel free to contact me if you had some questions. At some point, some of you may find some letters and you want to do something with them. Yes?
It sounds stupid, but that black book with the gold.
Yeah.
It's right here.
How do they type it?
That was typed in 1902. Oh, no, yeah, 1902, and they had typewriters then. Manual typewriter. Yeah, that was
They
typed.
must have typed it and then bound it?
Yeah.
Oh.
But her husband was president of Century Publishing Company in New York City, so I think that must have been worked through that connection because it's so fine with this gold gilt edge pages and everything.
But
I don't-
typewriters are always.
Oh yes, but if you're working in a publishing company, they could do a family book for someone. In this case, they must have. That's a very nicely bound book. That was a special order, probably from the president of the company. Yeah, we need to do this as a present to your sister, and then one for our. But there are only two of them. It wasn't, but it was invaluable to me. We probably should wrap it up because we have to clear out of here. But thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking with you. Hope it was helpful.